Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic Monday. Today we are talking about Crested Gecko care. This is part 2 in our video series about buying your first Crested Gecko. This is one of the most important videos in this series, so I definitely recommend watching this. If you're deciding whether or not to get your first Crested Gecko, care is one of the biggest deciding factors in whether an animal is right for you or not. So I believe if you watch this video and you don't think this is something for you, then maybe getting a Crested Gecko isn't for you either. But the care for Crested Geckos in general is very simple. Today we're going over a basic care guide for Crested Geckos. I tried to make this as complete as possible. Obviously, if you still have questions after this video, feel free to leave a comment down below or check my other past videos. I'm sure I've talked about it in one of those videos. But today we're going to be talking about the care of Crested Geckos. So one of the biggest things in care is obviously getting the appropriate tank size. And now it can be kind of confusing when it comes to tanks. You basically have two options though. You can go the plastic tub route or you can go the glass terrarium route. Now personally speaking, I believe if you're only going to have one, maybe two geckos, the glass terrariums are the way to go just because they do look a lot nicer than a plastic tub. However, if you are going to be keeping more than one gecko and you're thinking about maybe, getting into geckos, so to speak, maybe plastic tubs are the way for you. However, I think glass terrariums do look much better, so if you're getting only one gecko, I would definitely recommend a glass terrarium. But before you get a glass terrarium, you got to consider what size the gecko is that you're getting. So for example, I would assume a lot of you are looking to get baby geckos, and I would recommend it actually because it's really fun watching a little gecko grow up. So if you're getting a baby gecko that's, say 5 grams or so, which is pretty small, I would recommend putting them in a plastic tub until they are a little bit larger before moving them into a bigger home. So what I mean by this is if you get a 5-gram gecko, I'd recommend putting them in like a 15-quart shoebox kind of thing from like Walmart or Lowe's and drilling some holes or melting some holes in it and letting them in there until, they're 10 or 15 grams. A little bit bigger and a little bit more manageable and a little bit more stable too before moving them into something like an 18 by 18 by 24 or a 12 by 12 by 18 glass terrarium. Now I'm not going to get into the debate of what, should you get an 18 by 18 by 24 or 12 by 12 by 18? I personally believe 12 by 12 by 18 is big enough for one single adult Crested Gecko. However, if you disagree with that, you should look at the different sizes and then you could obviously move your gecko up into a 18 by 18 by 24 as it got larger. And granted, we've talked about this in the past, but some geckos are just going to be bigger than others. Some geckos are going to be more active than others. If you get a little male, he may only grow, 35, 40 grams. 12 by 12 by 18 is going to be perfect for him. If you get a bigger gecko that likes to move around a lot, an 18 by 18 by 24 might be better for you. Now, if you're thinking about getting a glass terrarium and you're like, well, I don't feel like spending, $50 or $100 on a new terrarium, I definitely recommend checking out like Craigslist or something like that, Marketplace, where you can get a used one. You can pick them up pretty cheap, and generally they're not in too bad a condition, especially if you have multiple options to choose from. You can pick a pretty nice one and get a good deal on it. However, if you are looking at tubs, let's say you're looking at getting a plastic tub, basically the biggest plastic tubs are going to be less than $20. As long as you're okay with them living in the tub and, seeing that in your room and you're able to drill the holes in it, then, by all means, go ahead and do that. However, I would definitely recommend glass terrariums for the beginner keeper. They just look so much better in a room, like especially if it's in your bedroom or something. Trust me, you don't want to see a big plastic tub sitting in there. Now, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you are getting a baby gecko, I definitely recommend starting in a smaller tub and then moving it up as it gets bigger into possibly a glass terrarium. Generally speaking, after your gecko is 10 to 15 grams, you can move them into like something like a 12 by 12 by 18 or the equivalent size tub, which would be like 40 quarts or so. So, other than that, you're pretty much set when it comes to tanks. You can always go to your Petco and check out what it would cost to buy a new 12 by 12 by 18 or an 18 by 18 by 24. At my local store, they're usually about $60 for a brand new 12 by 12 by 18 and about $100 for an 18 by 18 by 24. So I realize that might be a little bit more expensive than some of you want to spend. So then I would definitely look into a plastic tub for them. Moving on, let's talk about the next big thing, which is temperature and humidity. Now, Crested Geckos can survive, keyword there is survive, in temperatures between, mid 60s to like 82 degrees, I would say. on a regular basis. However, I wouldn't recommend keeping them at 65 degrees or 69 degrees all the time. They would grow extremely slow, and frankly that's just not good for your gecko. So if you're looking for optimum growth, I recommend keeping them between 74 and 78. However, keeping them anything between like 68 and 82 will be fine. I mean, they might grow a little bit slower, a little bit quicker, but just generally speaking, that's a pretty good range to keep your gecko in, and I'm sure they'll be okay. However, keeping your gecko warmer will significantly increase the rate at which they grow. Like I said, that 74 to 78 seems to be a good range, especially for little geckos, like anything under 20 grams. They really do better at a little bit warmer temperature. Once they get to be adults, it's not as big of a deal because they're not doing as much growing, but just know that if you're getting a little gecko, a little bit warmer is a little bit better. Now, humidity is another big thing when it comes to crested geckos. One thing I did not touch on in the tank part of this video is that do not get a screen cage. I just wouldn't recommend it. I know some people say it's okay, and I might have said it's okay in the past, but frankly, you're trying to keep higher humidity for these creatures where they do come from. It is more humid, so keeping a screen cage just makes it difficult. You're probably going to have to block off like 3 sides of the tank anyway to keep it as humid as it needs to be in there, so it's just really not worth it. So just don't get a screen cage. But that being said, your humidity should usually be between, I would say, 50 and 80%. Now, obviously, if it's outside of this a little bit either way, it's probably not going to hurt them, and to be honest with you, I used to measure the humidity when I had my couple geckos here, but now that I've gotten so used to it, I don't even know the last time I measured the humidity. I mean, you just mist them once or twice a day. You can kind of tell, is it too humid? Is it not humid enough? And like what I do is I mist them once at night before I go to bed. You don't want to get them so wet that the whole cage is soaking. Just a nice mist. I wish I could explain this in better terms, but you don't want it too dry where they don't have enough water. You don't want it where they're soaking. I mean, they're not frogs, people. Like, don't drown them or anything in the mist, but basically you just want to give them a nice mist at nighttime is what I do personally. If you feel that it's too dry or you're living in a more dry climate, like something like maybe Arizona or New Mexico or something like that, maybe you need to mist in the morning too. What I recommend doing is buying a hygrometer, checking how humid it is in your area during different seasons of the year over the course of about a year or so, and then you can kind of know, in winter it gets pretty dry, I should probably mist twice during the day. Maybe in summer it's a little bit more humid, maybe you only need to mist once a day. But other than that, I mean, it's frankly not that hard. It's not rocket science. So don't get all janky if your humidity is not, exactly at 80% at night and exactly 50% during the day. You just want to keep them nice and humid. Don't want them too dry. You don't want them too wet. Now, if you're wondering what happens when you keep your tank too dry or too moist, going on either end of the spectrum is really bad. If you keep your gecko too dry, you run the risk of it being dehydrated, and if it's prolonged dehydration, possible health issues or death. And if it's too wet, also basically the same thing, just opposite. You run the risk of having mold and fungus grow, having a respiratory infection, and I mean, in theory, if you kept it too wet for too long, your gecko would also die. So just keep an eye on things. Buy a hygrometer, check how humid it is. You want your gecko to be moist. That's the key here. Not all the time. It should dry out during the day and be a little bit more moist at night, and that is the key here. And you'll kind of find a cycle once you get your gecko, and you'll know how much water he needs. Okay, now that we've got all that boring stuff out of the way, we're kind of getting to the fun part of this video, which is decor and kind of substrates and how you're going to actually make your tank. Now, I have a lot of videos on this, so I'm not going to go over this, like all the different little decor things, but there is a lot of nice decor you can get. You can get, feeding ledges and like these suction cup branches or magnetic mushroom ledges and all this sorts of cool stuff. If you're willing to spend that kind of money, you can by all means deck out your Crested Gecko tank with all this cool stuff. Now, I'm not here to talk to you about how to deck out your Crested Gecko tank, but I'm here to talk to you about some of the basic things you need. So, Crested Geckos are a semi-arboreal lizard, so sticks are a must. Now, I see a lot of people on Facebook especially who take a 12 by 12 by 18, right? And they get those suction cup plants and they stick the whole wall full of all these plants, right? Well, I mean, that's great, right? But sticks are better than plants. Your gecko can't really I don't know how to say, he can't really crawl on these plants, and he can hide under them, yeah, but they're not good structure to climb on. So, and if you watch that video from last video about Dave Kaufman and Crested Geckos in the wild, you'll see there's a lot of little thin sticks and vines and stuff that they're climbing on. So sticks are better than vines. Granted, you do want some leaves in there so that they can hide, but you do want more sticks than like plants in there. You don't want to just cram the whole tank full of plants. That's not what Crested Gecko is like, and it doesn't really help them in their ability to climb. So that's one thing. Or like ledges would be good too, like I said, or the suction cup sticks or anything like that. And you can find a lot of these online, but they are going to be a little bit more expensive than just getting like those vines or like some sticks. Or what I'm using now, or I'm going to start using anyway, is like PVC piping with end caps on it. I mean, you can pick 10 feet of PVC pipe up for like a couple bucks, and the caps are a couple cents. You stick them on there, cut it to the right size. It's very easy, very clean. However, I understand a lot of you might not like looking at this nasty looking PVC pipe in your tank, so you can find, fake sticks and fake vines and all that for your tank, and it'll look much better. But just keep in mind, not so many plants, more sticks. And if you really want to make your tank look nice, you could do a bioactive tank. I understand that may not be necessarily the best for a beginner keeper. However, if you look up videos on YouTube, you can see some of the more simple bioactive tanks that you could try. I personally have never tried it, but if you want to, by all means, they look nice. A lot of them have live plants and all that in it, and little isopods and things, so that's pretty cool too. But just keep in mind, you're looking for bigger structure items when keeping your Crested Geckos, ledges, sticks, that kind of thing. Stay away from cramming so many plants in there. Now, the last thing we need to touch on for care is feeding and watering. As far as food goes, there's a lot of options. I use exclusively Pangea diet here, but you're welcome to use whatever you think is best. And you have things like Pangea, Repashy, BFG diet, Clark's Gecko diet, Leap and Leachy's diet. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can feed out there. It's just Pangea has just been the thing I've always used, and it works for me, so, why change it? And what I like to do is I like to cycle through foods. So Pangea does have the little 2-ounce bags that you can get for pretty cheap if you want to try different flavors. You can just go to their website and check it out. It's pretty cool. I believe it is important to swap through diets, though, occasionally. How would you like to be fed cheeseburgers every single day of your life? I don't think you would like that at all. You'd probably go crazy. So it'd be better to give your gecko little diets here and there. What I like to do is swap through like 2 or 3 at a time. Like right now I'm doing watermelon and apricot, and then occasionally growth and breeding formula. And then, maybe down the line I'll go back to figs with insects and, stuff like that. But swapping through diets is good in my opinion. For a one gecko though, you don't really need a lot of food, especially if it's a little baby. You're going to go through a very small amount of food. So what I recommend doing is picking up some of those 2-ounce bags from Pangea. I think they're like $8 or $10 a piece, and you could get like 2 or 3 flavors, and that'll probably last you a couple months. So it is very cheap to feed Crested Geckos. Now, one thing I'd like to mention is that you should feed your Crested Gecko bugs at least once a week, in my opinion. I know some people say you don't have to do it, and technically you don't. The Crested Gecko diets are mostly complete diets, so in theory you could feed them that for their whole lives. However, I just feel it's important to give them bugs, whether that be dubia roaches, crickets, whatever you want to do. Just research the bug you want to feed them, make sure it's not, harmful for them, and, give them bugs at least once a week. Especially baby geckos would really appreciate the bugs. They love to chase them around. And that's another good thing that'll make your Crested Gecko grow faster. Giving them bugs once a week will significantly improve their growth. I mean, if you took a gecko and you gave one just Crested Gecko diet and you gave the other one Crested Gecko diet with bugs once a week, I bet the one gecko would be double the size of the other one in a year or two's time. It's just really important, in my opinion, to feed them bugs every now and then. And if you are going to be feeding bugs, make sure you pick up some good calcium to dust them in with D3. This way they're getting the proper amount of calcium with their bugs, and they're getting all the vitamins and minerals they need too. The last thing is watering. Like I kind of mentioned earlier in the humidity part of this video, I mist my geckos once a day, every single day. So this keeps the humidity up. It also allows them to drink the water droplets off the side of the tank. And if you're feeding Crested Gecko diet, that has water in it too. So I've never really had any true issues with dehydration in any of my animals. You may see a gecko that is slightly dehydrated every now and then on those really hot days, but generally by the time the next morning rolls around, they'll be fine. I've never had any issues with severe dehydration, and I've never kept any of my Crested Geckos with water in their tanks, like standing water in a little cup or anything like that. However, you can keep water in your Crested Gecko's tanks. There's nothing wrong with keeping a water dish in there. I've just been someone who's never done that. However, if you do keep a water dish in your Crested Gecko's enclosure, make sure you do keep a close eye on it. letting it get dirty can create a lot of problems, just like the humidity can. I mean, especially if they spill it and you let all the water sit there, that is horrible for your gecko. So if you are seeing that it's dirty, you need to clean it, and keeping a water dish in there needs to be kept under control, so that way you aren't getting things like mold or fungus or anything like that. So make sure you clean your water dish often. Personally, I would recommend every day if you can, every other day minimum. You just don't want it to get dirty and let your geckos drink that nasty water. Now, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, the last thing I have to talk to you about is a couple of things I believe are most important before getting your first crested gecko. These are things I think you need to have before you get a gecko. So obviously you need to have a tank. This is probably going to run you anywhere from $25 to $100. You're going to need some kind of mister. You can pick one of these up from your local pet store or your local hardware store, $5 to $10 roughly. You're going to need some food. I'd recommend getting 2 different kinds right away. So that's probably going to run you about $20. You're going to need a thermometer, and you can often get a hygrometer built in. You can pick one of these up from like Pangea for about $15. They have a really nice one, and it tells you the humidity and the temperature. One thing I didn't mention earlier that you're going to need is a scale. This way you can measure your gecko, make sure they're healthy and gaining weight. You can pick one of these up on Amazon or from your local Walmart or pretty much any store really for about $15. Don't overpay for a scale. If you are buying an adult female crested gecko, you are going to need a lay box. This is something you might have forgot about, but getting a female gecko means you need a lay box. I have videos on how to make your own lay box for really cheap. It's going to cost you less than, $5, $10. So if you're getting an adult female, you should go watch one of those videos, and it'll help you make your own lay box. And the last thing you're going to need is some decor. Now, this is really up to you how much you're going to spend on this. You could be really cheap, spend about $10, $15 getting some pipe and some fake leaves from your local Hobby Lobby, or you could go all out and spend $200 on a bunch of ledges and cool looking decor. It's really up to you however you want to do this, but your overall cost is going to be somewhere between roughly $75 and $200 to set up your crested gecko, not including the gecko itself. So just keep that in mind when getting your first gecko. Anyway, if you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would drop a like down below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to try and get part 3 out next week. That is going to be talking about different morphs and crested geckos. Now we're getting to the fun stuff. Morphs and buying your gecko. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in next week's video.